All right, well, welcome to another episode of the Take a Look podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Snyder. For those of you who have been paying attention, maybe you're not, there is a provincial election happening this month, February 27th. Premier Doug Ford has called an early election, I think in efforts to get ahead of the federal election that is due to come later this year. So we at Take a Look are meeting with all of the candidates here at the Bay of Quinte, and today I'm joined by Lori Borthwick. Thank you for coming on, Lori.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Ryan. It'll be fun.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Lori is the candidate for our local Green Party. You ran in the by-election last fall, correct?
Yes, not even 6 months ago.
And you're back again for more. Great. Well, let's just start off getting to know you a little bit, Lori. Maybe you can tell us a bit about your background and how that brought you into throwing your name in the hat.
I know, it's crazy. I'm 60 years old and I'm launching a career in politics. Who would have thought? So I began my career here in Belleville in 1989 as a respiratory therapist. Respiratory therapist, for people that aren't aware, we work with mostly critically ill patients, putting them on life support. So most of our work is in ICU, emerge, and we do critical transports across from hospital to hospital. So for many years I have done that, over 30, and I retired just pre-pandemic. And then
So you missed that whole excitement of respiratory work.
I didn't miss it because I went back.
Oh, you did? Oh, excellent. Good for you.
They did need, at that time we needed help.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked, whenever they needed someone, they'd call me, and if I was available, I would come in. Mm-hmm. And I work 1 day a week now at cardiology services, but I am fully retired from the hospital now, and I've given up my respiratory therapy license, so I no longer have to get my heart rate going when I hear an ambulance, which is good because I hear them all the time.
So why politics? In your retirement, that's how you relax, right? Is you get into politics.
That's not how I started. I was frustrated in 2018 when we had the provincial election. I worked, I volunteered for the NDP, local NDP, and I was disappointed that there wasn't a local Green candidate. And then that was the year that Mike Schreiner actually won and became the first Green MPP in Ontario legislature. And so several of us who were kind of Green oriented got together and decided to start a constituency association here. And I just hoped to kind of build some Green momentum. Didn't really plan to be the candidate. Mm-hmm. But you never know where you're going to end up.
And why Green?
Well, I have a really strong interest and concern around climate change. The more I learned, the more I wondered why no action was being taken or very little action. And as well, I've always had a really strong affinity for the natural world. I've always been very curious about it, and I always wanted to learn more about it. So I just seemed that really most political parties always are looking to win the elections, and unfortunately red squirrels and slugs and moss do not vote, and so they don't get a voice. And Greens, we still go ahead and advocate for those that can't speak for themselves. Mm-hmm. So that's why I was Green.
Mm-hmm. So your whole career as a respiratory therapist, is that?
Yes. Yeah.
So how did that shape your views on politics? So did that play a role into stepping into the Green methodology or political viewpoint?
It definitely changed my politics. I began my life as a conservative, progressive conservative. And when I started working, I was still had a lot of conservative type values. But over time, seeing people coming into the hospital who are sick, who are scared, and the struggles they faced, I started to realize and recognize that even though, my life wasn't perfect as a child at all, but I did have a level of privilege that other people hadn't enjoyed. And I got to realize that a lot of what I thought the conservative policies are quite harsh when applied to those that haven't had the same privileges that you have growing up. And so I started to kind of shift left. And I know they say as you get older, you tend to become more conservative, but it hasn't been the case for me. I've definitely, I've seen people come in and the struggles that they face, and they need help. Mm-hmm. They don't need to be preached at, or they don't need to be told to pull up by their bootstraps. They don't have any boots. They need help.
Mm-hmm. With this last by-election, and for most elections actually quite consistently in Ontario and across the country, voter turnout is super low. I know in this past by-election we were under, was it 30%, something close to that, which is kind of astonishing. Why do you think that is? Why are people not coming out to vote?
Well, if I could answer that completely and know that I was right, I'd fix it. One of the messages I'm trying to get across this election is that the person who won the last election was not Tyler Alsop, it was apathy. Nobody came out to vote, and people just seem hopeless. And a lot of times you'll knock on the door and they go, I don't bother to vote. And I'll say, well, why don't you vote? And they go, well, you're all the same. Well, that's not actually true. But why do they feel that way? Why have we got to this level where a lot of people have so much distrust in politics? And I think in large part, the issue is that we've created a system which is a combative and confrontational system. You're blue and you're going to yell at red, you're going to yell at orange, and they're going to yell at each other across Queen's Park the way you wouldn't even let your children behave in the living room. So we have this, and they see that the policies aren't really always benefiting them, and they've lost their trust of politicians. Politicians should be public servants. They should be working for the good of the people that elected them, not the party. So that's the other reason I'm green. It's people power, and it's people over party. So as green, I am expected to represent the needs of my riding. Mike Schreiner will not be giving me notes, and I am not told how to vote on any policies. And I think that's a big part. And I wish that everyone, because everyone that's, not everyone, but most of the people that run for politics, they're good people. And they need to be able to do good things.
Least, I think.
Yeah.
I think most of them are well-intentioned.
Yeah.
But I think, like you say, the system is something that bogs people down, because no matter what, actually, my pastor's wife said this to me, and it's kind of stuck with me. She said, I don't think that you can be a Christian and a politician at the same time. And that's a pretty controversial statement, I think.
Yeah.
But I've been pondering. I'm like, well, why would she think that? And I think part of it is because of the natural relationships you have to build with special interest groups and things like that, where you're forced to compromise on things maybe where you shouldn't, and that's where we get this bad reputation out of it. But how do you think we can turn that perception around? Because like you say, there's so much of this combativeness within Queen's Park, but also if we zoom out a little bit into the body politic in North America, worldwide even, we seem to be more polarized than ever. So how do we change that around, specifically in our jurisdiction in Ontario, but also the Bay of Quinte?
I think the first thing you do is you lead by understanding that the other people are people just like you. They're not other people. And you just think of what is your goal. And the goal of myself and Amanda and Dave and Tyler should be to meet the needs of the people in the Bay of Quinte. What do they need? And then go to Queen's Park, and every other MPP should be feeling the same way. Mm-hmm. And they should all be talking and collaborating together. And I think it's possible. I believe that politics
you don't think
doesn't
that's
have
idealistic? It's like, because it's,
well,
I mean, it sounds great. It sounds great,
right? It is idealistic, but it's idealistic, but it's also real. Mm-hmm. So I worked in a hospital with critically ill patients, And someone comes in and they're critically ill and they're going to pass away if we don't do something. And I'm the respiratory person, so my job is to make sure they're breathing. And the nurse is often the blood pressure heart person. And I don't know, most people don't understand, but when I'm pushing air into the lungs to do the breathing part, it can impact negatively on the heart and the blood pressure, and you need both. We collaborate. I don't say, I'm just going to push air in no matter what, and I don't care what the nurse needs to keep the patient alive. And she doesn't say, I'm just going to do whatever I need for the blood pressure and not worry how it impacts your ventilation. We work together for the best needs of that patient, and we do it every day. And I think that we just need to change the way we think about things. And people need to stand up for what's right. They have to start standing up for what's right. They have to say, you may be telling me this, as my party leader, but it's not what's right for the people in my riding, so I'm going to choose to vote a different way. Or I want this part out. If people don't stand up, all that is needed, as John's told me many times, all that's needed for evil to prevail in the world is for good people to do nothing. And when you don't vote, you're doing nothing.
So how do we translate that into actually getting the turnout for the vote? How do we is this a long-term thing where we actually need to spend this time changing political perception? Yeah. This is on the MPPs, on our MPs federally. It's on them to kind of change the tone, or what can we do locally here in the Bay of Quinte specifically? Is it the youth vote? Is it getting the young people involved more? Or what are the answers there?
I think the thing is, we've seen what's happened south of the border. We have a terrible situation where we have two parties just ripping at each other, and it's being taken advantage of. And, it's put basically the whole world into chaos. And so this kind of leadership is not working. And so what we need to do, first of all, if you're going out and you think it's important to vote, go out and talk to your neighbors and your friends and your neighborhood. Don't even ask them who they're going to vote for or who they'd like to vote for, but say, I'm going out to vote. Do you need a ride? Can I help you get out to vote? Let's get as many people out to vote as possible, because cynical party politics plays a role. So Doug Ford probably has already done the math in his head, most likely to win if he has a low voter turnout. So he calls an election in February. And it's a month where many people who are snowbirds are gone, and he makes a 28-day election. So mail-in votes are very difficult for people in the South. And he has bad weather days. So the other thing that is really impactful for voters to decide to vote is to actually get a chance to see and talk with the people vying to represent them. And you I can't knock on every door in this riding, especially not in this weather and not in 28 days. So if you're not engaging with the electorate, then they're not going to vote. They need to feel passionately that it's worth their time, but it only takes a minute or two. So.
Well, I think that's what we're trying to accomplish here, which is get to know you a bit so people can actually have an informed vote. And maybe I think I see that as part of a bit of the apathy as well. Is like this, like you mentioned, if you see one politician, one size fits all, which isn't obviously the truth, but that's the perception most people have. And I think if we can get to know people a bit better on our local level, then maybe that will come out. But anyways, listen to the whole podcast. Listen to Amanda's podcast as well. Let's talk about the Green Party for a second. So first seat was in 2018, and with the by-election last year, that doubled. Now there's 2 seats at Queen's Park. Yeah. What do you see the Greens' role in Queen's Park is? Obviously, with those numbers, there isn't a leadership position coming for the Green at this point. But what is the Green Party's function and role there, even with their 2 existing seats?
I think we're the conscience of Queen's Park. We don't have, we're not vying for power per se, but we have a lot of policies that we feel that would be really great if they were implemented. And for Greens, we follow 7 7 ideas about sustainability mostly. But one of the things we believe in very strongly is participatory democracy. So we want people to participate, and that's why we don't whip our MPs or MPPs. And I don't know if you're aware, but Greens are the only party that is international. None of the Liberals or Conservatives or NDP, they're not national, they're Canadian only. So these, we are actually connected to the Greens in Germany, the Greens in Sweden, the Greens in Norway, all around the globe. There's Greens in Africa, and we're all working towards the same goal, which is a sustainable world where living things still have a chance when we leave space for them. So,
well, let's jump into housing because I think this is definitely the biggest, if not the biggest issue in the past decade. Healthcare maybe is up there as well. What do you think is the root cause of our housing crisis?
Well, it's hard. I'm a little bit older but I have children who are in the ages that 3 of them between 26 and 30 that, they wonder if they'll ever be able to get into the market. And they all 3 have great jobs. And I have 2 other children who are older and were lucky enough to buy in before things got as crazy and they were more, they're closer to 40. So they were able to be more established. I see 2 issues. One issue is that we have a real pressure on our population, like we've had a lot of population growth. And in the 90s, the federal government stopped building affordable housing and got out of the affordable housing market, and they assumed, wrongly I think, that the private sector would just build the types of housing that people need and could afford. And that did not happen, because when you're a private business, you're trying to make money. That is your prime directive. So that was the issue. I think we've seen a lack of affordable housing, no new affordable housing, or even apartment buildings, very seldom built since 1994, which is like 30 years ago. So we have those crises, and then there's a crisis of, I'm going to just say how I see it, greed, where people are trying to make money from the scarcity of housing. And we have a lot of housing that's empty. It's just sitting there empty because someone's hoarding it like a dragon with their gold, while people freeze to death in the snowbanks. I just don't understand. I
think that really accessibility to housing, that just there's a supply and demand problem that we have. We had a very large influx of newcomers to the country, and we haven't kept up on the infrastructure front nor the actual building of the doors. Yes. Forget about being affordable or attainable. They just don't exist there. What would the Green Party propose they do actually, and does the provincial government actually have enough sway as it stands to make meaningful impacts in municipalities?
Oh, well, I think Doug Ford, if he's proved anything, has proved that he has. I mean, municipalities don't exist as a legal entity hardly. They don't. The province can tell them to do whatever they want, and he has. So obviously the provincial government has the levers that it needs, but it needs the will to do it. And I feel like there's a little bit too much of, under the current conservative policies, sprawl. Sprawl is 2.5 times more expensive to build than infill development. It tends to be, I see it all the time, you see these very, very large homes on what used to be prime farmland, or farmland, maybe not prime, but definitely there was corn and hay and other things growing there before the house grew there. And nothing now grows there but this big house. And we need to build that's not the kind of housing that my kids can afford. That's not the kind of housing that most people who are working regular jobs can afford. So we need to be building the housing people need. It's just not as profitable. So we're wasting resources, we're wasting time building the wrong types of housing in the wrong places. And so as Greens, we really believe in building that missing, what we call the missing middle housing within urban boundaries. And that means not, obviously, for a place like Picton, you're not going to put in skyscrapers, but 4 stories, quadruplexes as of right. We need to be building that.
Right. So, I've actually mentioned the fourplexes to my father-in-law, who has been a committed conservative his whole life, and his pushback to me on that, because I'm like, oh, why is fourplexes not a thing? This makes sense.
There's triplexes.
This
What's
is
the
great.
difference?
Like,
One more
we
plex.
need more volume. This is a great way to do it, especially for the not in my backyarders who don't want the low rises. This seems to be a great compromise. But his pushback was this: what happens to then the investment of the private property owners who have the veto powers in the municipality for when a development proposal comes up to come in and say no, no, no? At what point does the province come in and push through certain projects that the municipality may not be supporting?
Well, most municipalities right now are supportive of fourplexes. As a matter of fact, Belleville is, and they would like to be able to build more of them. So the premier doesn't like fourplexes. I don't know why.
But I think
it seems like a
it's not just
strange
the
place to
government
start.
part of it, though, either.
Yeah.
I think, right? Like, you have the municipality as the incorporation, but you also have the people who make up those neighborhoods who are the not in my backyarders, who don't want even the low rises in, who don't want added volume because it doesn't it changes the culture or the vibe, or even it affects their investment potentially. Where does the provincial government come in and
these people are going to move into lots of new people, and students and people of lower incomes are going to be moving into the houses in your neighborhood, whatever way they can. It doesn't matter. We see, like in many residential neighborhoods now, just regular family homes. They're being purchased, and they're putting in 10, 12 rooms, and they're renting those rooms for $700, $800, $900, quite often $900 to students and temporary foreign workers and people who can't afford to live anywhere else. And that is not a good solution, because it often, if they're not inspected, and sometimes they get under the radar, there could be fire issues and stuff. Much better to have a beautiful quad fourplex. I don't understand. I have no understanding why anyone would be against that. Go to old Montreal and look around. It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Well, so speaking of rentals, STAs, or short-term accommodations, the rules behind that have been left to the municipalities to come up with their own licensing and permitting structures. Obviously, the STAs have had an effect on accessibility to housing and affordability. What does the Green Party, what is their take on, should the province get more involved with making more restrictions towards STA rules, or is that something that should be left to the municipalities? Because obviously, like you say, in certain towns, especially in the county, it's almost like ghost towns because so many of them are short-term accommodation. Mm-hmm. What can the province do there, and what should they do? Is there an area that the province should take back jurisdiction over instead of the municipalities?
Well, I think you do have to kind of look at it as also a rights issue, but it's a tourism issue as well. But when you have the tourism taking up housing for the people in the community, and then there is no sense of community, because if only like half the houses are even occupied, you might have 3-4 houses before your next neighbor. So you lose that sense of community, and it's not good for anyone that way. So I think that the problem is often finding the STAs. I think we're all aware in Belleville that they had to really go hunting to find them, to get them to pay any type of accommodation tax. So it would I would be in favor of the provincial government saying, here's the rule for STAs, they have to be within your primary residence, or they have to be on the same lot as your primary residence, maybe a bunkie or a smaller, house. Maybe not just buying multiple houses, renting them out.
Mm-hmm. It is a tricky one. I think you're right, because on the right side, when Airbnb first really came to the county, I was even an STA operator. We had a duplex, and one side we rented
You were
out
living
short-term.
there as well.
So it was a great situation for us, and it actually became a lot of work, and we decided that long term is probably more beneficial for us, and it was just a little less hectic, I think, on the schedule. But one of the things that I first thought of when they came up with when they came up with licensing and permits was like, well, it's my private property. Don't I have the right to do with it with what I please? But now we have seen this drastic effect, especially on smaller tourist communities like the county, where now housing is not just unaffordable, but inaccessible to those who need to work in the community. So I really like the model. I mentioned this when I was talking to Amanda as well, but out in Canmore and Banff, they have certain developments and buildings that are worker-only housing. So you need to actually work for a business or run a business in those jurisdictions to actually have access to that. Is that kind of a zoning system that would be beneficial, do you think? Is that something the province should be putting more incentives towards or helping adjust, or is that kind of only work out in those unique jurisdictions?
Well, I mean, Prince Edward County is become a tourism area. I guess I have a little problem with telling a segment of the population that you just can. So you have a lot of power when you control a person's housing. So if I'm a company, and we fought and we unionized to get rid of company housing. So in that, the company then can fire you and you're evicted and your whole family is, and they can also control the rents. And sometimes you're working for essentially nothing. So it's a slippery slope. There would need to be lots of protections for the workers. If you started to do that. I don't like the idea of ghettoizing workers either. So
yeah,
I have some concerns about it.
Sure.
But I can understand, like in an area was so expensive, how else are they going to get?
Right, because I think the result is what we see in the county as well. We have a lot of these even new fast food restaurants where they just can't staff them because people can't afford to live in the town in which they work.
Yes.
And with some of the newer developments coming in, and maybe they're especially up on the heights where some of these lower income properties are being shut down, people are being evicted and moved elsewhere. So your workforce on the lower income side is completely dissipated.
Yes. No, I agree. And that's where I feel, again, we're not building housing. We need to be building, the government needs to be getting back in the business of building nonprofit and deeply affordable housing, and maybe not in just controlled by the companies that want to hire you, but offered by the government of Canada to those that require it.
Mm-hmm. So what it sounds like is densification is really kind of the answer to avoid the sprawling and affecting the environment that way.
Yes.
How do we go about densifying certain areas while keeping the environmental impact to a minimum?
Well, actually, so it does seem counterintuitive, but densification is protecting the environment. This is as soon as you go into like a forested area or many of the other important natural features, wetlands, marshes, get too close to them, you're impacting them greatly. So it's counterintuitive to me because as a nature lover, do I want to live in a high rise in a big city? No, I don't. I want to have access to nature. But it is actually a smaller carbon footprint and better for the environment if we have people living, in a more in a denser way. The other thing I think we need to consider as humans is how much space do we need to live? I have a very small cottage, and it's about 600 square feet. And John and I we don't need much more space. So sometimes I wonder when did we get this concept? If you look, I'm old, so this is why I think this. If you look at the old neighborhoods and the older houses built in the 50s and 60s and even 40s, and whole families lived there, and we all survived it. There might have been one bathroom instead of two. Sometimes there were two. But now you look at the new houses, they'll be right beside it. The family's probably smaller and the house is twice as big. I don't think that we can keep doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought I could live in a smaller house as long as I had access to nature, if I was around trails, if there was a park nearby. I think the hesitation with a lot of the densification is densification of those communities themselves, that where, like you say, a developer needs to be profitable in order to build housing, period, whether it's affordable or otherwise. So a lot of that land is going to be used up for housing. But as far as like the community in itself, I think that's where, like, if you're stuck in the concrete jungle and it's just buildings around you, then it becomes a different situation. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I guess in the Bay of Quinte, it's a little different because we are in the middle of nature.
And we need to really protect those natural areas instead of impacting on every one of them. For instance, in Belleville, we have the Bell Creek watershed, which is really important to the health of the Bay of Quinte, from which we pull our drinking water. And there is constant impact of development into and encroaching very close to the watershed. And the watershed does not work well. It does not clean and filter the water. It does not absorb the water if you have hard surfaces right close to it. And so we're really not leaving space for nature. I think of the world, the whole earth, as, let's just consider it's like 100-room mansion. Right now, the mass of other mammals on earth that are not humans, our pets, or the food we eat is about 6%. So they only have 6 of these 100 rooms right now, the rest of nature. And we're in that house and we're knocking down walls and we're ruining the plumbing in the water system and we're causing fires and smokiness and polluting, and those all of the rest of nature's in 6 rooms just huddled and shivering and hoping we don't break into their last little piece of the space. So we really do need to consider, we're lucky in Canada right now. We have, we have a lot of space, but southwestern Ontario, now eastern Ontario, we're seeing a lot of densification. Most Canadians live within 100 miles of the border. And we really do need to consider our impacts on what's left of the natural world. Otherwise, when we have hard rain events or we're going to have more impacts with heat days, we need that tree cover. We just have to think more about it.
Well, do you think that Ontario should require stricter sustainability standards for new developments?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do.
What would that look like?
Well, there's multiple things, but you can build with materials that actually sequester carbon instead of emit it when you're using it. I've followed Chris Magwood for a while, and he does some amazing stuff. So his buildings are actually sequestering carbon. So it's incredible, as well as being incredibly energy efficient. So hardly needs any energy to run. But a lot of the very energy efficient buildings are not actually as friendly or sustainable as you think, because they use maybe a lot of concrete, which is a huge CO2 emitter. So it's always kind of a delicate dance, but also some easy things like they're talking about developing down on the Bakelite site, which is a beautiful area of land, was highly contaminated, but between 2 marshes, 2 provincially significant areas. with a ton of wildlife and a ton of birds that use that area. A simple thing to help the wildlife in that area, if you're going to put some development there, is to have bird-friendly glass so that the birds are not running into it. Our birds, our songbirds, we're losing them, and changing the type of lighting in the subdivisions so that it's not spraying upwards but is more directed down. There's a lot of things you could do.
I guess the difficulty with that is like a lot of the more environmentally responsible or environmentally sound products come with a higher price tag, because a lot of these things aren't being mass produced to the same extent traditional building materials are. For example, there's still research and development happening there. But how do we balance that out versus because if we're using all of these sustainable or more expensive products, then obviously the cost of the housing is going to continue to go up. So how do we then reconcile affordability with sustainability?
I think it depends on the type of sustainable initiative you have. I will say that. A lot of what Chris does, I don't think is a lot more expensive than regular. As a matter of fact, he makes houses with straw bales. So I feel like those are pretty inexpensive, those ones. But you're right. Some things are more expensive. When you're looking at things like the lighting, it wouldn't really be any more expensive. As a matter of fact, it would save on electricity in the long run. So a lot of times it would pay you back over time, similar to geothermal. If you're using that to heat your house, the problem is it's really expensive at the beginning, but it's really cheap down the line. It save a ton of money. And one geothermal system could heat all the houses in the neighborhood. But we just need to start looking at a longer term.
So how do we get those things? Like geothermal is amazing, but like you say, it's very expensive to put in, especially on an individual basis. But if you are doing a community or even just a cul-de-sac or something like that, how do we get that, like from the provincial standpoint, where infrastructure is funded often from the province but implemented and planned by the municipalities? How do we get those two ends to meet?
There's an Ontario building code. It needs to just in many cases, it really just needs to be implemented and made sure that it's being followed. A lot of things like that are good for sustainability are already in there, although not geothermal. I mean, that's a separate issue, because the current Conservative government has really close ties with Enbridge, or it appears to. So they actually are the people that are implementing a lot of the retrofitting of your house. If you can go and they'll come in and they'll assess your house and tell you how to make it more energy efficient, which is kind of like letting the wolf in with the sheep, because they sell methane. Methane is 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide in the short term as a greenhouse gas warming agent, and we need to get off of fossil fuels, and yet they're the ones that are going around telling us how to make our houses more efficient. And it is almost never to get rid of your natural gas furnace. Why are we still making developments with pipelines of natural gas to them when they could all be on a geothermal system? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I'm glad you brought up code, though, as well, because I think we live in the land of regulation here in Canada, specifically in Ontario, where we have a lot of rules for a lot of things, which can be good. Like we shouldn't have no regulations, obviously. But when it comes to different types of living situations or different types of building, either they are not permitted by the municipality or they won't be funded by the banks. So, for example, you can't live in a trailer on vacant property. You can't live in a trailer in somebody else's backyard, which seems very counterproductive, especially when we're in a housing crisis.
Yes.
Is that somewhere where the province needs to revisit and even even push the municipalities forward to start changing some of those policies across the entire province?
Oh, I think so. We need to look at solutions. Yes, there's a lot of things within the Ontario Building Code that are there to protect people, even from things they don't understand. That they need protection from, like fire safety and what types of materials are being used for that reason. There's also things that we need to plan for going forward with the greater impacts of wind and flood events that we'll be seeing. And there's things that, like right now, not within our riding, but other ridings, radon is a fairly big problem with coming out of the soil gases. And if developers were to use the appropriate membranes in all the basements, not only would it keep people from getting exposed to radon, but it would also waterproof your basement so that you would never have a mold problem. And how amazing would that be going down the line? So we just need to look at the impacts at the beginning and make sure. It might be a little more expensive at the beginning, but over time it could save you thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of fixing your basement, which is pretty expensive if you've ever had to do it.
Well, let's talk specifically in the Bay of Quinte. What do you see as, we have a housing crisis across the entire country, across the province, in particular the Bay of Quinte. What do you see as the specific challenges on fixing this problem?
Well, there's quite a few challenges. The biggest challenge is building the kind of housing that people that live here can afford. And so as Greens, we do have a plan to lift development charges off of any homes under 2,000 square feet, and also to try to help first-time home buyers by giving them a 0% $25,000 loan to when they have their house to have a affordable rental attached to that. So that would help first-time home buyers, I think, in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. But we also have a lot of provincial land that we could be using and developing for affordable housing projects like the Greater St. James Street, like the Sydney housing, like the Victoria Place. There's and it seems very clear to me that the people that are leading this are just really passionate individuals and nonprofits that have gotten together and really worked hard to do this. And how much easier would it be if we had the provincial seed money and allowing people to develop these types of projects everywhere. Like we have Quinte Secondary School, we have a lot of school areas, we have the old Intel building downtown. I mean, I don't think anyone would miss it if it got changed into, we have a vacant lot right beside Bridge Street.
And they just announced the new development at the old fairgrounds now as well.
Yes. So we have a ton of space for infill.
Right.
We could probably build all of the housing we need within those spaces right now. We just need the will to do so. So after World War II, we were able to build tons of housing.
So is that municipal restriction, or is that just lack of zoning change by the province, or where's the main issue there?
The main issue is that the governments are not funding and leading that. They have stepped away from housing, and they're just expecting the private sector to manage it on their own. And the private sector is not going to be looking to build the least expensive housing. Mm-hmm. So you need to have the government step in and pay them to develop the least expensive housing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think on the private sector side, the argument.
I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying,
right. No, for sure. You need to make money at the end of the day. You're not gonna do it for free.
No,
there needs to be incentive.
There needs to be incentives.
And I think on that point, that's where a lot of private sector, I know, especially Pierre Poilievre is pushing. It's the municipalities are the gatekeepers with all the red tape. Is that a reasonable assessment of where that is, or is this really back to teamwork? Is this just federal, provincial, municipal just not getting on the same train and it's causing issues? Is that?
I think Belleville is pretty good at trying to work with developers and move things ahead. That's my sense from watching the City Hall and watching the Planning Advisory Committee and that. I think they really try to work with them. I mean, it may not be the same across all municipalities, but I think it's pretty easy to always blame the municipality, especially if you're in a federal position or even a provincial position. So the municipality is always where the buck stops. They're the politicians that live in your community and can't get away from you, and you're gonna find them at the grocery store, and you know, they're not paid as well, and they have so many responsibilities. They're responsible for social housing. They don't have the money for social housing, and that's where the province could step in. If we can spend $50 billion to build a tunnel under Toronto, if we can spend billions of dollars moving alcohol out of LCBOs into every corner store, and my favorite, on routes, because who doesn't need to buy beer on their way home from
you
work?
gotta drink on the go, right?
I just thought that seemed like a really bad plan. And interestingly, my wonderful partner John mentioned to me that we have halved the amount of money over the last 7 years that goes to stop help enforcing drinking and driving. So just when more people are, we're reducing that.
Mm-hmm.
But there is money. It just takes the will to do so.
I want to move over a bit into one of the other things that's really causing a shortage in housing is lack of skilled trades. Mm-hmm. We have, I think, for over 2 decades now, since I was in high school and the OEAP program was first brought into place, we realized the boomers are going to be retiring, and that's where the majority of our tradespeople are. So we're going to need trades. We need trades. There has been a lot of investment into trades, but still somehow we can't seem to get trades right now. So you hire any contractor, you're paying an arm and a leg to get anything done, especially if it's going to be anything of quality. And now Loyalist College has done a 20% cut across the board and has even cut a lot of the trades programs locally here. What's going on there? How do we solve that?
Well, some of it might not be a quick solution, but the colleges having to cut these trades programs, that's a quick solution. We just need to fund the colleges. So we fund our colleges and post-secondary education institutions at 57% of what the rest of Canada does. Doug Ford held tuition for Canadian students or Ontario students.
Was it the PC government that implemented the tuition freeze? Mm-hmm. That was his first year in power, correct?
And I don't have a problem with that, but then you have to increase the funding to the schools. How are they supposed to provide the same thing? So you know how they did it? They brought in students from all around the world, and they charged them probably 3 or 4 or 5 times more than an Ontarian would pay for the same education.
And that's making up almost 70% of the tuition at Loyalist, which is putting a lot of your eggs in one basket.
But what there's no other baskets, there's school. You know, so are we going to fund education or are we not? What is the best way to ensure that you have a thriving economy? In my estimation, is to have a well-trained, well-educated workforce, because they can do anything. They can slide into anything. Education is the best bang for the buck they can get. So they should be funding these community colleges and universities. But the other issue, and it's a longer-term issue, is that we in Canada, and you know, I had 2 boys, and they were both very much encouraged by all of the counselors at their high schools to go to university and become professionals, quote unquote. And because I had them in, back then they were streamed, they were in academic but that doesn't mean they have to be a professor or anything else like that. And my youngest son decided that he would like to pursue the trades, even though he was in academic and he had excellent marks. And they were like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. You don't want to do that. And he goes, yeah, I do want to do that. So he went to St. Lawrence. He took electrical technician course, and now he got out, he got an apprenticeship, and he's a fully licensed electrician. And he's fully employed, and he makes over $100,000 a year. And a lot of the kids that he graduated with who went to university are unemployed.
Right.
And I think we're doing our kids a disservice if we are valuing jobs and valuing education that way. Nothing against university education. I have one, but it's not what got me my job.
So is that a cultural shift, or is this something in the educational program itself? Because I remember when I was in high school as well, I went through the academic stream, and the idea there was don't limit your options.
Yes.
Make sure that you always could do whatever. I finished high school with a 74 average because I did not like going to class. I did not like going to school, but I did well on my exams, so I was able to get through. But there was definitely the sentiment that the idea was if you don't go to university, you won't make money.
Yes.
If you want to make money, you need to get a post-secondary education, and not necessarily on the community college side, but on the university side. I'm not sure where that narrative has come from, whether that's built into the education system or if that is a cultural thing. But I've been saying the same to young people. It's like, if you're unsure about what you want to do, get a trade first. Because if university, wonderful, but make sure that there's a job at the end of it, or else you're just going to be swimming in debt and have nothing to prove, nothing to show for it.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know. I know when I was young, it was really pushed for my family, go to university, go to university. And I did go to university. I went to the University of Guelph. I studied human kinetics, human biology for 4 years. And I came out and there were no jobs. I applied for one job. It paid very poorly. And and when I was there, it was a pulmonary function technician job. There were respiratory therapists there working who were making way more money than I would with only 2 years of college. And I thought, I think I'm going to be a respiratory therapist. Yeah. So we need to, I think there's a bit of a classism around education, and I think that we need to strip that away. There's no reason why kids who do great academically shouldn't be taking trades.
Well,
They'd be great
explain
tradesmen.
that a bit for me. What do you mean by classism there?
Well, I think there's a thought that if you go to university, then that is proof that you're more intelligent, or people have this perception in their minds, and that, that's the way to riches or something. And it isn't. And nor is the job of someone who's gone to university necessarily of any more use to society than the job of someone who did not. I mean, if the pandemic proved anything, I think it proved that essential workers are people that often do not have university degrees.
Mm-hmm. Well, how do you think we get in the short term? Because, I think educating new tradespeople is obviously a long-term thing. Most apprenticeships are minimum 3 years.
Yes.
How do we attract more tradespeople to this area? Because I know that next to North Bay, the Bay of Quinte is one of the fastest growing rural communities in Ontario. So we're growing. There's industry here. Stuff is happening.
Yes.
We want to grow. We're ready to grow. But if we don't have the tradespeople, then, we're SOL. So in the short term, how do we attract people who have this sort of skilled trades to come here?
Well, so you have to make the community something that people want to move into. So we already have the beautiful area. It's beautiful. People would love to come here if they enjoy waterfront, if they enjoy forests, if they enjoy any of natural riches. We have those in spades. But I mean, my son, one of them is still here, and he complains, there's nothing to do at night. There's not a lot of young people here. That's an issue. Because if you want to attract younger tradesmen, there needs to be other younger people for them to socialize with. So we have to look at our community as a whole. And for hospital workers, we have trouble attracting people to come and work at our local hospitals, which is similar in a way to tradesmen. We're also tradespeople just in a different trade. And it's cost of housing, lack of childcare, and educational options. So the educational options is we do have Loyalist College, but we don't have a university nearby. So some of the things that would help to make this a better community that more people would want to come and work at is to have, and a family doctor.
Yes.
So you have to kind of make sure that you have things in place that would make the community a vibrant one. And then you have to advertise and say, hey, Bay of Quinte, it's happening. You want to be a tradesman, come here.
Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit. One of the biggest, I guess, kind of in tandem with this provincial election is the threat of the U.S. tariffs by President Donald Trump, who has delayed them conveniently for after this election. Yes, you're correct. What does this mean for Ontario and housing in particular? And what would the green approach be to combating these tariffs? What's the plan here?
Well, I think from listening to all of the debates we've had so far, our plans are pretty similar. We're going to create tariff task force, or a group of people that from all around that are going. Is that okay?
That's okay. Yeah,
okay.
Just keep going.
Yeah. So groups of people that work together across party lines, and work against the tariffs. We're all going to create a program so people can buy Canadian and buy Ontarian. We're going to have funding for the most impacted sectors of the economy. We're going to support people's jobs. It's going to be kind of a pandemic response. Everyone's going to be working together on that. And I don't see a lot of difference between the different parties on this. I will say that I think that I can't remember the second part of that. What was the second part of it?
Yeah, well, how do we... So is the answer there basically reshoring, bringing processing back to Ontario, back to Canada? Because
you'd have to do that probably through co-ops, because most multinational corporations are not interested in manufacturing in large part in Canada. They'd rather to do it somewhere where the labor is cheaper. But I'm a strong believer in co-ops. So I think the government can get involved, and we can create some good industries. In Quebec, they have a lot of co-ops that are very successful there.
Mm-hmm. With international trade, there's obviously the threat of tariffs and everything like this, but we also don't technically have a free trade agreement between provinces, where we do have we have this really strange trade system between our provinces. What is your idea on how we change that? Because it's kind of silly, really, if we're if we're going to be competing, having these tariffs come in from the States, why not make it more conducive to do trade within our own country?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I think maybe we found it, as I was saying earlier, not everyone, but most people in Canada, majority of the population live within 100 miles of the U.S. border. So I guess we just thought it was simpler, if you're Ontario, trade with Michigan, then trade with Prince Edward Island or BC. But obviously, the people in BC and Prince Edward Island share more similar values than the people possibly south of the border at this day and at this time. So it's a perfect and ideal opportunity to take down some of these, what I would say, outdated interprovincial barriers. And I think they will definitely be changing very quickly now.
Well, I think that's kind of the silver lining with a lot of this tariff talk is there seems to be a bit more of a political and even societal unity here, where it's like, we're all Canadian again. We forgot that for a minute, right? And it's like, no, we're Canadian, and maybe having a unified enemy is the way to do that. So what, as far as long-term view for the Bay of Quinte, what is your vision for our riding? What do you see as the next 4 years? What is your ideal route look like?
Well, the one thing that I hate about politics is that they think in 4-year cycles. And I don't think that that's the best way forward. I think we need to look down to our children and our children's children and their children and make sure that we have a sustainable development that allows us all to live here and have the food that we need and be able to get around. So one of the things that I have a vision for in our area is to improve the transit systems and the way to get from community to community. They are working on it, but it's going very slowly. Of course, as Greens, we plan to upload the transit costs back to the province. So that would really help, I think. But we really need good transit systems for people so they don't all need their own personal cars all the time. For one, they're becoming unaffordable. And for two, they may not be available for much longer. We'll see. And the other thing is to really protect our farmland in this area. We have some of the best farmland, and we have to make sure that we can still produce food in our regional local areas. And then we need to build the kind of housing that people can afford in the places they want to live, which hopefully is more within urban boundaries. We'll see about that.
Yeah. I think the nuance there, it's difficult, right? Because I think within urban boundaries, but also there's a lot of opportunity for rural development in a micro way. So, for example, like I'm on 3 acres of non-farmable land, which would be perfect to put a garden suite on. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of steps in getting there.
There is so many steps.
Are very expensive before I even break ground. So that's where I see more of the municipal red tape side of things, where it's, even though it's great to have, say, a federal incentive, it's great to have a provincial incentive, even a local tax rebate, perhaps, to build a garden suite. But if I'm still being restricted by, I see it more as the lack of teamwork coming from the municipal side of things, because when you basically, it's kind of a guessing game when it comes to building anything that maybe not rinse and repeat. So it's because instead of saying, hey, how do I do this? It's like, no, you need to give me the right code of the right answer before I say yes. So for me, it seems like the municipalities could do a lot better job in providing assistance on increasing certain housing or solutions like that, and allowing for alternative living. Like I say, the trailer in the backyard, for example, which that's all bylaw, and there's been some pretty horrifying stories of that being just gotten rid of, even over COVID, when people didn't have places to be, and they got kicked out of their temporary living situation because it was against the bylaw. So
well, there's a reason for that bylaw, because they're probably not able to really get rid of their septic or have safe drinking water. There's a few issues around letting people live permanently in a trailer that's not set up to accept a permanent trailer solution. I get it. But we have no trouble with them camping all summer in it. So winter isn't that much different. But we definitely... I myself kind of looked into trying to make like a little suite on the side of my house in Belleville, and it just looked like it. Like for me, by the time I paid to have that done, I would never ever make enough rent to pay for it, because I would have to pay to have everything done. I have no skills, carpentry skills, but if you were building from scratch, easier, I think, for sure. But I think the one thing that people who are making bylaws and legislating is always consider the unintended consequences, and sometimes, and not to be afraid to say, well, that isn't working as planned, maybe we need to tweak this. It's not a failure to learn from your mistakes, it's a failure not to learn from your mistakes.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to end it there. Well, maybe we can just, if you want to let the people know, where can they find you, and where can they learn more about the Green Party's initiatives and platform?
Well, you can go to gpo.ca to find our platform and all of our various initiatives. You can go to Bay of Quinte, gpo.ca, for more local information. As Greens, we're very careful with our money. So we don't have an office per se, but I do work out of my house, and I am always happy to talk to anyone if they want to give me a call. They're always able to reach me. And I do have an email as well that they can reach me through. I'm happy to meet with people and discuss things, but we don't have an office at this time, unless it's my Chevy Bolt, which is full of election materials right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Lori, for coming in. I really appreciate the time, and good luck with the rest of the election coming up. And may you get enough rest for the energy you're going to need for it. And for everyone out there, make sure you get out and vote. I think that is the biggest thing. Apathy is it gets you nowhere, really. And you really need to, if you want to affect change, you need to actually get out and participate. So thanks again, Lori. And I think that's it.
Thanks.